What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, welcome back to the Resilient Life podcast. I have an old dear friend with me today, Tim Sullivan. Tim,
hello,
welcome.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, we were really, I'll give some credit to our guy Tom right here. So we're trying to think about like what did September 11th look like for this year and the Resilient Life podcast, and we've never really done anything with the podcast to like commemorate September 11th. It's kind of just been me getting behind the mic and talking about my feelings about that day. And Tom came to me and he said, "Hey, what do you think about Tim Sullivan?" And you guys have never met, but he knows your story and your connection to TMF. And I was like, I love it. Let's do it.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm not sure if I should say you were scraping the bottom of the barrel to get me as a guest.
Oh, come on now.
Or no, it is an honor to be here. Thank you very much. And it's incredible that it's 24 years since that day. And to sit here and look and be like, holy my, it's 24 years. And so it's wild. It's wild, and that's all I can say.
We did some press a few years ago. It's probably like was it the 20th? I'm trying to think when that was.
The Megyn Kelly?
Yeah, we did Megyn Kelly show. We did some other.
2017, I thought.
Okay, so it was even longer than that.
Yeah,
so you and I did, and we're obviously like, I think we need to revisit that story that we shared because it's why you're sitting here today. It's why we're connected in the way that we are. But I always think like as we get further and further from September 11th, 2001, like I always think when you say 24 years, the first thing I think of is like, who do I know that's 24 and younger, right? And like that gap between those that were alive on that day and those that weren't.
I was just talking this morning with my daughter, Kaylee, who's 18. She's a freshman in college. And she was saying to me that this is going to be her first September 11th out of New York because she's a freshman in University of Charleston, West Virginia. And I was actually saying to her that it's 24 years, and I think the number is about 30%, maybe a little bit higher, of this entire population of the country wasn't even alive. Yeah. It's an entire generation. And now a girl like my daughter is just reading about it.
And she's an adult.
And she's an adult, and she's reading about it in the history books. And so for her, it's personal because of being, obviously being my daughter and being around it and going to the firehouses and the different memorial services or the 9/11 Heroes runs or the different events that we've done with the Travis Manion Foundation. But she's kind of wondering what it's going to be like for her to be in West Virginia.
Right. What's that experience going to be like? Because how are they going to remember that day? It's clearly going to look different than it does in New York City.
Yes. That's 100%. Yeah. So it's.
Well, and I think about, the beginning years when we would have our 9/11 Heroes run. And in those first several years, as we were expanding and we were going to locations across the country, and I would get up and I would speak, and I would always remember being like, every single one of you remembers where you were on that day because every single person was alive on that. And now, last year in Doylestown, there were thousands of people there. And I got up and I'm like, most of you weren't here,
right?
23 years ago, because you see all these kids and I'm like, most of you weren't here. And like, that's why it's so important that you're standing here today,
Right. And I was honored to be one of the speakers last year at the Doylestown Heroes Run, and to look out on the crowd and to see, the how big the crowd was and how in tune to it they were, does give me hope that it's being remembered, and it's that somebody is out there leading the way to say, look, this is what happened that day. We need to remember it, good, bad, or indifferent. And to see places like Doylestown and I can't even say Squamish, Washington, Squamish, where William Lennon is running the Heroes Runs. I mentioned Bill Lennon because he and I went to high school together. And it was actually through the Travis Manion Foundation that we reconnected.
Wow.
So to hear the hero runs and things like that, but to look out and see all the young kids, the young adults that were not alive. And then it makes, and I was, as I referenced, talking to my daughter this morning, that's what a few years after Pearl Harbor, a few years after JFK, there were people that just read about that in the history books and how does it change things. And then, just for us alone, on a personal note, our son was born 2 weeks after. My wife was 9 months pregnant on 9/11, and our son was born 2 weeks later, and now he's a freshman in college finally. It just, the 24 years is amazing of how things have gone, the roller coaster of everything that's happened in those 24 years.
Yeah. Well, I think let's walk back to September 11th, because I think it's important for people to hear your story and your experience that day. You're a firefighter with Rescue 1.
I wasn't with Rescue 1 at the time. I hadn't gotten assigned to Rescue 1 yet. So I was a New York City firefighter assigned to Ladder 28.
Ladder 28, okay.
Yep. And I was a young firefighter. So my story is my story, but it's a story of thousands of other firefighters and police officers. So I'm
going to preface before you start telling your story, because I know you very well, and you will gloss over things in an effort to be humble. And I think for the audience and for the benefit of the thousands and thousands of people that were not alive on September 11th and learning through these stories, I want you to tell the story and
I will.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was a young firefighter. I'd been on the job a short while. And
Marine veteran. So you get out of the Marine Corps, and now you're a New York City firefighter.
Right. So I joined the Marine Corps I went to boot camp the day after high school graduation. I served in Desert Storm. I reached the rank of sergeant, and that was my goal in my career in the Marine Corps. And then, and one of the things I do, we talk about regrets in life. One of the things I do regret is that I wish I had stayed in the reserves when I became a firefighter, because I didn't know how well the fire department treated its reserves. Reservists, guys that were serving in the reserves, by giving them the 1 weekend a month or the 2 weeks a year. That's one of the things I do think about sometimes, but life moves on. September 11th, I was off that day. I was home. It was actually a beautiful day. It was very similar like to today.
Yeah.
As we look outside, but my wife was 9 months pregnant. She is and still is a school teacher. She had gone to work, and I was just downstairs reading the newspaper, and the phone rings, and my brother Dennis, who was an officer in the Navy at the time, he was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. He called me, and as soon as I answered the phone, he goes, "Oh, thank God you're home." And I said, "Dennis, what are you talking about?" And he says, "Aren't you watching TV?" I said, "No." He goes, "Turn on the TV." So I turn on the TV, and the first tower is burning already. The first plane had hit, and I said, "Wow, it looks like the brothers are going to be busy today." Knowing what the response to a high-rise fire.
And are you thinking it's just like some sort of accident?
I just thought it was, that there was a big fire and that the brothers were going to take care of business like, the New York City Fire Department has always done. And he stopped. He goes, Tim, it's going to get worse. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, Tim, get to work. And I was like, okay. So I grabbed a bag. I jumped in the car. I started heading to work. And as I'm driving to work, it comes, I'm listening to the radio and they say, the reports that the second plane now hits. And I'm like, holy God, this is crazy. I called my wife. Obviously she's teaching, so she doesn't answer. And I leave a message. Hey, something's going on in Manhattan. I got to get to work. I'll try and give you a call later. Yeah. And that was the message I left for her. My friend Steve Elliott. I called Steve and he was like, holy, this is crazy, and he's jumping in his car. He's heading into work also. And as I'm driving into work, and I've said this before, I'm driving this little 1990 Chevy Cavalier, and I'm doing about 104 miles an hour because that's as fast as the car would go. And it's shaking, and the whole thing is shaking. And meanwhile, as I'm driving, there's cops and firemen past me on the left and right, racing into the city. Where I lived in New York, I come in from the north. So when I got to Yonkers Raceway, which is just north of New York City, you could see the skyline of New York and I could see the two towers burning. And I just got this feeling and I said, this is not going to be good. And so what I did was I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I called my buddy Jeff, who we had already asked to be the godfather
Of your son.
of our unborn child. And I said to him, look, firemen are going to die. And if something happens, you're the godfather. You got it. And he said, I got it, Tim. So anyways, excuse me as I break a little here. Get into the firehouse. There's all guys coming in from off duty. Everybody's trying to figure out.
And where was Tower 28?
28 truck had not responded. Okay. Cause the way the response of the city goes, they have a response plan and every companies are assigned on different alarms. So luckily 28 truck had not, itself, because it was so far north up in Harlem, had not responded. And the firehouse that I actually had gone to was 52 engine.
Oh, so you didn't even go to your...
No, because at the time I was on there was a training program going on in the city for young firefighters. They called it the training rotation.
So you were rotating around.
So rotating around. And so I was assigned to 28 truck. I went to the firehouse at 52s. All the guys are coming in from off duty. And with that, we were just like, what do we do? Here we go. Meanwhile, there are other calls going on in the city. There's...
you don't think about that,
city
right?
The city doesn't stop, for the most part. So all the off-duty guys are then ordered to go and start moving. What we actually did was we stopped the first thing coming along because we had no vehicle for all these off-duty guys that had come in. So we stopped a post office truck and we unloaded the mail from the post office truck and put about 13 of us in the back of a post office truck, and that's what we left the firehouse in. Wow. So by the time I got down to the trade center, the two towers had already come down. So between getting to the firehouse, getting gathered up. So a lot of times people talk about, you responded to, I respond, but I wasn't there when the towers came down. I wasn't one of the brothers that, walked up, looked up saw what they were going into and started walking up the stairs. Those guys are the heroes. What I did and what other people, hundreds of other firefighters did. We came in and we did what we could. It was overwhelming. It was just crazy. It was to.
You were there for days.
I was there until Wednesday morning. And then they said, get out, if you're going to go. So what I did was I went back up to the firehouse. I got in my car, and now it's the next day. What had happened was at about 4:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday, the 11th, I had checked my cell phone, and somehow, I don't know why, but I had cell service. And I called Colleen, my wife, and she's like, oh my, and you were there. I'm like, I'm okay. Everything. I'm okay. She's like, when are you coming home? I said, I don't know.
Yeah. And
so then what happened was I was there for days. If you remember the morning that President Bush came to the Trade Center, which was Saturday, I'd worked all through that Friday night, and early in the morning, they came in to the site, to the ground zero, or the World Trade Center site, and they said, look, a very important person's coming here. If you're staying, stay. If you're leaving, get out now, because this entire area is being locked down. Yeah. And I was like, I'm tired. I'm dog tired. I need to go home. And I went home, and now Colleen, I said, she's really pregnant. She's ready. And we're sitting there and we're watching President Bush on TV, and he's doing standing on the rubble with the guy from 164 truck. I hear you, they're going to hear, and my wife just loses it, and she just has a complete meltdown, and she's like, I'm like, she's like, I can't believe you left. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you left, you left, and you were willing to go. I said, well, it was my job. She goes, yeah, but you didn't even think about me or the baby. And I said, I did think of you. She said, what do you mean you thought of me? And she's crying and bawling, and it's crazy. And I said, I did think of you. She's like, how did you think of me and the baby? I said, I called Jeff. And all of a sudden she stops crying. She turns and she looks at me. She goes, you called Jeff? I said, yeah, I called Jeff. She goes, you left me with Jeff? I said, I'm sorry, Brad Pitt wasn't available. So, it's over the years, it's been that's a very funny joke among us. And it's, obviously I'm still sitting here, and, but those are things that firemen and cops had to think about. And, on the way there, I did think of my wife, and, that, Jeff, you got it if something was to happen to me. But, the guys that responded, I don't know if they got the chance to call anybody. Most of them didn't.
Right.
But there's a picture, and I wish I had it with me. There's a picture from Rescue One where I eventually went, got assigned to, and it's taken by a Daily News photographer, and it shows Rescue One responding to the Trade Center. It's taken from behind the rig, and you can see the first tower burning, and you think those guys on that rig could see what they were going to. Yeah. And they still went. They did their job. They did the best they could, and you see, like one of my friends, John Cirillo, just retired last week, a couple weeks ago. He became the captain of Rescue One. He was a fireman. He talks about how he rode his, he's one of those guys that rode his bike from Brooklyn. He didn't go through the tunnel. He wasn't, tunnels to the towers or anything like that. But these different guys that went in there, and I remember him saying to me once, I'm like, John, how did guys survive? And he goes, some guys made a left, some guys made a right. If you made a left, you lived. If you made a right, you died, as the towers came down. And to hear different radio reports, all these recordings that have come out, and you listen to like Captain Patty Brown from Ladder 3, being up in the 70s, on the floor in the 70s, saying, I got fire, I got burn victims. And the chief tells him, hey, Patty, you got to get out of there.
Get down.
And he goes, I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
I'm not leaving. And that the New York City Fire Department, everybody knows what they did that day. The New York City Police Department, the Port Authority police officers, and even the civilians in the towers, the stories of bravery, of trying to overcome. You hear the story about the Army veteran who was the director of security at, I forget which company, but he constantly drilled his company members on the evacuation, and people would get mad that he was always running the fire drills and the evacuation drills, but he got most of his people out.
Yeah.
He went back to check for more people, and he died. So in the weeks and the months after, like I said earlier, our son was born exactly 2 weeks later. The first plane hit at like 8:47 in the morning on September 11th. Our son was born at 8:47 on September 25th. And and one of the things that happened is that we did not know that our son was being born with some pretty massive birth defects, which just blew us out of the water. His head was all misshaped. He was missing his ear, and which just started a whole roller coaster of things for us.
Yeah.
But once my wife delivered him in St. Agnes Hospital in White Plains, New York, and then he gets transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit at Westchester Medical Center, and he's in the the NICU there. My wife's in the hospital there. Meanwhile, there's still all my friends are either working or still buried in the trade center. It was just an absolute crazy time. And you fell into this rhythm of going to work. And so you'd go to the work, you'd work in the firehouse, then you'd go to the trade center, you'd work the trade center for as long as you could, and then you'd come home. But then on the way home, what you would do is, because then the memorial services started, and they would come out with lists, and there's this memorial service and this memorial service, and this one's going on in Rockland County, this one's going on in Long Island. And I would come home and I'd be holding Aiden, and my wife would say, well, whose funeral or whose memorial service did you go to today? I'd say, I don't know. On my way home, I would say, I'm going to that. I'm going to stop in Rockland County. I'm going to stop in Orange County, and I'll go to 2 or 3 memorial services, and then start it all over. And then with what was going on with Aiden is we had all these doctor's appointments because none of the doctors had any idea why he was born the way he was. So we're rolling, and the person that really is amazing through this is my wife, Colleen. I'm working and I'm doing my thing, but she's now at home. She has a baby. Everybody thinks, oh, it's going to be great, going to have a baby, and everything's going to be perfect, and everything wasn't perfect. And then I'm going to, I'm working at the trade center as much as I could, and then I have to work. I'm working in the firehouse, and I'm going to memorial services and funerals, and I'm trying to go to as many doctor's appointments as I can. And she's, handling, things like, and you're a mom, you know what it was like bringing your first child home and, things like that. And she sort of missed out on that, between 9/11 and between, having a child with birth defects. it was extremely hard on her. So the days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months of just this constant rotation and trying to, and even and New York City firefighters, everywhere, and police officers. We didn't just go to the trade center when it was our turn, when we were scheduled. We went even on our days off, and we went, whenever we could, or, the funerals and the memorial services, because one of the things we will, unfortunately, the fire department is very good at running a funeral. But one of the things that we, as firefighters, we will be there for the family. Yeah. There'll be hundreds of guys in blue outside that church.
Those were some of the most prolific images, was seeing all those services and watching how you guys showed up in that way. And I think about, I had Joey Jones on recently on the podcast, and he just released a book called Behind the Badge, I think it's called. And it was highlighting like first responders. And he said something that I never had thought about, with this idea, like you being Marine, Joey was a Marine, you're deployed, Desert Storm, like you have a crazy day. Well, you're going back to the barracks, you're with your guys, you're decompressing. Like you think about, you're down at the World Trade Center, like searching for bodies. And then you have to go home and you have to be in that house and you have to be the dad and you have to be the husband and you have to process all of that while, keeping your composure. And I never thought about it in that way. He's like, these guys go out every day and then they have to come home and they have to,
right.
take that home with them and also be the husband and be the father and be the provider. And so I can't imagine when you talk about that condensed time period of everything you were dealing with every day.
And it was, I'm not, like I said, I appreciate what you said before. Like one of the things that I did before, I had been in a bagpipes band. And one of the things, like I said, is you go to all these different memorial services and stuff like that. One of the traditions and one of the most poignant things at a fire department funeral is the bagpipes. Yeah. And unfortunately, because there were so many memorial services, the FDNY Emerald Society's bagpipes band was running. They couldn't keep up. They couldn't keep up, and they were trying to. They were trying their best. And I do remember what I noticed, a couple times, like, man, there's not a lot of bagpipers here. So what I started doing was I started carrying my bagpipes.
Just in case.
Just in case. And I'm not saying that I did it well, because I got a few comments from some guys that, told me I should probably
practice a little more.
But I did, because I would bring, and I remember one, Steve Bates's memorial service in Brooklyn. I'm outside the church. He was actually one of the guys that had rotated through 28 truck and then had gone back to his firehouse in Brooklyn, and unfortunately, died in the towers. But at his memorial service, coming into the church, I didn't hear any bagpipers warming up. So I got out my bagpipes and I piped by myself as they entered the church. After the service, when we were coming out, 2 bagpipers from the band had showed up.
Because they had probably just come from
They had come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So now the 3 of us are trying to bagpipe together. We did the right thing, but I did not sound good. And if anything, and it was actually after Stevie Bates's funeral or memorial service, is that I put down the bagpipes and I've never touched them since. They still sit in my basement. I look at them once in a while and I've never touched them since.
Now, why is that?
It was overwhelming. That on top of everything else, to try and do that, and I have friends in the band, and the FDNY Emerald Society band does a tremendous job. But at that time, I think there was actually a special on 60 Minutes or one of those shows where they focused on the band and just what the band went through.
Yeah.
And the band itself lost a ton of members. There were guys from the band and things like that. So those are some of the crazy things that went on in that time period. And then, every firehouse that you go to in the city, I was a young firefighter. There was 15 guys from my fire academy class that were killed on 9/11. There were guys that I knew. There was, Chris Blackwell, who was at my wedding in 2000, from Rescue 3. He was killed. So you go to the different firehouses around the city, and you knew somebody there. You were friends with them. You hung out with them. And then to go to these firehouses where, like, when I did go to Rescue 1 eventually, and they lost 11 firefighters that day. Everybody that responded from that firehouse, died that day. And to walk in every single day and to see their plaques on the wall, and to see what they did, and to one of the guys that I worked with for my entire time at Rescue 1 was Mike Guidell. Mike's a great guy. His brother Gary was also in Rescue 1. He died on 9, and I would sit there and sometimes I'd just look at Mike and be like, I wouldn't say it to him because he but I would say, how does he come to work every day?
Show up here
at the firehouse where and it was just a testament to his intestinal fortitude, and that he was able to go through that. And then, like, when I went to Rescue 1 as one of the new guys, was then to be able to train me. And that's the mark of a great firefighter, is that despite everything that he had seen and done and experienced in his career, he then still had the wherewithal to, hey, Tim, come over here. I'm going to train you on this. This is what, let's do this. This is how we do it here at Rescue 1. And it was one of the 5 years that I worked at Rescue 1, were the greatest 5 years of my fire department career. And that's going to lead me into...
Yeah, well, let's talk about Rescue 1 and the 5 years you spent there. And I actually pulled this today. So I've got my dad's book here, Brothers Forever, which he released in, I think, 2012, if I'm not mistaken. So I have admittedly... I've never read this book cover to cover. I read a lot of the drafts of this book. I read a lot of the different passages. I was involved in, helping my dad with a lot of the editing, but I've never actually picked this book up and read it. And, but I knew there was a story in here about Rescue 1, and I found it, and I'm going to read it. And then we're going to go from there. So, let's see. One of the first things so it's just prior to Thanksgiving in 2006. Travis flew to Philadelphia to spend a few weeks with family and friends. He had been home in June and again in August and was planning to take a trip to Australia with friends before his mom pleaded with him to visit again before deploying to Iraq. Like most sons, Travis occasionally rolled his eyes at his mom's protective nature, but at the same time, he knew how important it was to spend time with her before going back to war. One of the first things he did when he got home was meet up with Marine Major Steve Cantrell, an assistant Navy wrestling coach and economics professor whom Travis looked up to and respected. Cantrell had both coached and taught Travis in Annapolis and subsequently developed friendships with Tom and Janet after he moved to Pennsylvania. Even after Travis had left the academy and come back, Cantrell had admired the young man's strength of character. He saw Travis's will to succeed over and over again in the wrestling room and noticed how his hunger for success carried over to the classroom. Cantrell, who had served on the selection board that ultimately determined the path the Naval Academy graduates would take inside the military, was thrilled when Travis had made the Marine Corps his goal. Cantrell was subsequently assigned to the future first lieutenant's mentor. Aside from guiding Travis's physical training, including rehabilitation program after a second surgery on his shoulder, he helped Travis prepare mentally for TBS and the rigors of becoming a Marine officer. "You were a leader on the wrestling mat," Cantrell often told Travis. "Now you're going to be a leader on the battlefield." Even though Travis was much younger and a less seasoned Marine, he managed to inspire his mentor. Not only did Cantrell, who had graded Travis's essays and exam, know this young man was bright enough to do anything he wanted in life, he always marveled over how he strove for tough assignments. Because he had excelled so greatly at TBS, Travis had been permitted to pick his unit, and he chose 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, with full knowledge that at least one combat deployment was on the horizon. Cantrell admired Travis's courage and determination. Travis and Cantrell decided to spend a few days in New York City, where Cantrell had arranged a visit to New York Fire Department's Rescue 1 headquarters. Located in Hell's Kitchen, Rescue 1 had become a revered place over the past 5 years. The small Manhattan building, which was still fully functioning, had been the home base for 11 firefighters, almost half the unit killed on September 11, 2001. When Travis walked through Rescue 1's open red garage door, he saw men who had sacrificed and endured. It reminded him of the brave Marines he had seen on the front lines during his first deployment. The firefighters were welcoming, especially when they learned that Travis would soon be heading to Iraq for a second time. The firefighters assembled several tables of mementos for Travis to look at, including patches from the uniforms of several of the firefighters killed that day. The names of every fallen Rescue 1 firefighter were carved into one of the tables, and Travis did his best to remember all 11 names after he left the firehouse. "Steve, I can't believe what those guys were willing to do," Travis said to his friend and mentor. "I don't know if I could run into that burning building." "You've already done it, Travis," Cantrell said. "There's no one more prepared to get the job done than you are." As they were leaving the firehouse, one firefighter and former Marine thanked Travis for coming to visit. "Lieutenant Manion, I want you to have these hats and shirts," the Marine Corps veteran said. "No matter how crazy things get over there, you can put one of these on and remember what we're fighting for." Upon returning to his parents' house, Travis headed down to the lower level, where his dad was working in his home office. When Tom asked his son about his trip, Travis said that though he and Cantrell had some fun, the Rescue 1 visit was clearly the highlight. "I've never seen anything like it," Travis said. "The truly awesome thing is how much they supported us." After talking more about the day's events, Travis pulled out a blue hat out of his bag. With the Rescue 1 logo on the front and 9/11/2001 never forget on the back, it was the symbol of the war that had begun when Al-Qaeda attacked the United States. "Dad, I want you to have this and wear it while I'm gone. No matter what happens, always remember that this is what we're fighting for." Tom took a long look at the hat before putting it down on the desk and felt an immense sense of pride. As a Marine himself, he knew the sacrifice Travis was willing to make for his country. But as a father, he also recognized the danger on the horizon. "Now remember, you're an advisor. So that means you tell the Iraqis what to do and you step back and watch them execute," the Marine colonel said. Travis went silent. When his dad asked if he understood, the younger Marine spoke up. "Yeah, Dad, I've got it." But Tom knew that his son had no plans to step back. As a warrior and Marine Corps officer, Travis would always lead from the front. This is the hat as referenced.
Amazing.
in this book. And so we wrote this book. My dad wrote this book, and he wrote about the Marine Corps officer or the Marine Corps veteran who gave Travis that hat.
Yep.
We didn't know who it was, but like my dad remembered that conversation and felt compelled to put it in the book because it was a pivotal moment before Travis left for Iraq. And you're given a copy of this book by a friend.
Yeah, so it's actually mind-boggling that gets written about. You've been to the firehouse, you know where it is.
I do.
And I think we had a really good day that day.
We did. We had a great day.
Driving around the city. But being just west of Times Square, the firehouse would get a ton of visitors. People would stop by, firefighters from all over the country, all over the world.
It was not uncommon that.
It was not uncommon for us. And it was like you said, it was a Saturday night. I remember the night. It was a Saturday night, and these two guys come to the firehouse, and you're right. It was to me, and I think you've said this before, it was a visit. It was another visit, and I personally thought, hey, these two guys are here. They're in the city. They're probably going to leave here and head to a bar in Times Square.
I'm sure they did.
Go have a good time. But it did, being a former Marine myself, talking, and I will be honest, I did not remember Travis's name.
Sure.
It kind of just faded into the recesses of this, blank skull that my wife says I have. But years later, Steve Elliott, who I mentioned earlier, gives me the book, Brothers Forever. And he just says to me, you should read this. And I'm like, well, why? He goes, just read it. You'll see what I'm talking about. And so I start reading the book, and I get to that point exactly where you are. And I'm like, I remember that. Holy moly.
You were like, that was me.
That was me. I remember that night. That was December, I remember it distinctly. And I did not know that Travis had died. I did not know that he had been killed there in Iraq. And here it is. This is probably the end of 2013. I was just absolutely, holy cow, this is, whatever the craziness of it. And I just sat there, and I was like, so I called Steve, and I said, Steve, I'm in that book. He goes, I figured that was you.
Yeah.
He goes, it was either you or Joel Kanaski. He goes, and I said, no. I said, I was working that night. I remember that night. I said, and I remember Cantrell, he was a CH-53 pilot.
Yeah.
And none of that's in the book.
Yeah.
So Steve's like, well, you should, they got a foundation. You should send them an email.
And I remember that email coming through. Like, you literally were like, I read Brothers Forever, and I'm the Marine from Rescue One. And I'll tell you what, my dad was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I was just like, now, you read the book, and then at the back of the book, it says for more information, check out, and again, with everything that's gone on, there's foundations for everybody. There's a scholarship foundation, and the amount of golf outings and different fundraisers that I've been to, and at the end of the year, they give a $500 scholarship to a high school kid. There's foundations and scholarship all over. So I'm like, okay, there's a foundation. Okay.
They're doing a little something.
They're doing a little something. And, I'll check. And then I go on and I check it. I'm like, holy moly, this foundation is more than just some local, and you guys had grown by this time, and you were in the process of growing. So I sent the email, and I said, I think I even said, to whom it may concern.
Yeah.
And I identified that I was, the former Marine working at Rescue One that night. And I wrote, I'm not some loon. I'm not some crazy guy. I said, I remember that night. And to kind of prove my story, I described Cantrell. Yeah. That Cantrell, I forget his first name. Steve. That he was a CH-53 pilot, that he was at the, he was a reservist. I think he was still a reservist at the Fort Indiantown Gap out in Pennsylvania. And that's how I kind of proved, I want to prove that I was not just some weirdo, sending an ear. Anyway, and then I wrote, I just want to express my condolences, and that's it. So then time went by, and probably about a month went by, and I get the email from your dad. Dear Tim, we've always wondered who you were. I'd love to, sit down and have a beer with you and talk. And I'm like, well, I like beer. I like beer. So what happens is then, I tell Steve about that, and he says, well, in April, they're having a golf outing. Well, every foundation has a golf outing. So Steve's like, let's go down, we'll sign up, we'll go to the golf outing. And again, Steve and I thought we were just going to come down, donate money, play around the golf, and, and when we came to the Doylestown Country Club that year, and the foundation welcomed me, the way you guys did was just absolutely mind-boggling. And I remember playing the round of golf that day, and your dad kept asking me some questions. And I got a little nervous, like, is he trying to vet me? What's he? And then the guy that, oh my God, I can't remember the guy's name, his daughter sings. She's a phenomenal singer. She sang at the national anthem that day.
Bob Shoemaker.
Yes, Bob Shoemaker. I'm sorry. I pulled Bob aside at one of the holes, and I'm like, Bob, I said, am I at a place here? He goes, no, Tim, not at all. He goes, you don't understand. He goes and he tells me about the hat, and he goes, Travis visited you. He went to New York to see Rescue 1. He goes, and for you to be here is a big deal. And
that was my dad wanting to have every bit of information in a way to bring him comfort. Not, he wasn't vetting you. He wasn't. It was like, I want to experience everything that my son.
And that's what Bob kind of explained to me, and I realized, that, Travis being in New York with Steve Cantrell that night, and then coming home, and then leaving
he left like days later,
right? And not realizing that other than family and that
visit,
that I was so that visit was so remarkable, and it started a journey for me. In meeting you and meeting the foundation, to see what the Travis Manion Foundation has become, is truly amazing. And to have been asked several times, I spoke here in Doylestown at the 9/11 Memorial dedication, and then to have done several other things, on behalf of the foundation, and to see what you guys have done in growing and keeping the memory and the legacy of Travis and of Brendan Looney alive, and not just of them, but also of all the warriors that have served. My brother deployed to Iraq in 2003 in the Army. He did okay. He came home, everything's good to go. But to have a connection like we do with the Travis Manion Foundation, and I try to do what I can, but it's nice when you call me up or somebody calls me up and, hey Tim, can you help us out? Can you do this? Are you willing to do this?
And you always are.
I try to do what I can. I've run some marathons. I think I broke myself running a couple marathons.
Wait, this year's the 50th, Tim.
The 50th what?
50th anniversary Marine Corps Marathon.
Yes, it's 75. The first one was in, 75?
I guess so. Yeah. So, I'm running it.
I'm not running it. My lungs can't handle it.
We went to Puerto Rico together.
That was great.
Built some houses. We've done it all in the last 10 plus years.
We've done a lot. And that trip there to Puerto Rico that you mentioned was amazing, because I got to room with Chuck Siegel. And Chuck,
that's full circle. Who would have thought that the firefighter Travis visited with before he left for Iraq would be bunked up in a room in Puerto Rico building houses with the guy that Travis pulled to safety after he was shot on the last day of his life. You want to call something crazy.
It was, and I believe that's kind of one of the first things that Chuck did with the foundation.
It was.
And
it was the first, I had met Chuck a few months before for the first time in person. And I said, he's like, I want to be more involved. And I said, come to Puerto Rico with us. And months later, we're in Puerto Rico. And I'll never forget that first day in Puerto Rico. We were doing like a team bonding experience to, we went kayaking.
Yes.
And I had my daughter Maggie with me. Yep. And he said, hey, Maggie, why don't you be my partner in the kayak? And I remember he walked down and Maggie got in the front and then he pulled his shirt off. Mm-hmm. And he took his shirt off and I saw like just how messed up he was, all the scars from where he'd been shot. And I just saw him get in the kayak with my daughter. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like.
It had to have been surreal.
It was surreal.
It had to have been just mind-boggling to you to see that. And, and it was great. I got to know Chuck obviously on that trip, and I've seen him a few times, talked to him, text him once in a while. But it really is amazing what, the Travis Manion Foundation has done, and you continue to do with the 9/11 Heroes runs. I know a bunch of runs started last weekend.
They did.
The Marine Corps Marathon, the Team Travis and with the marathons, it's great. Unfortunately that it had to be born out of,
Well, this is the way I look at it, Tim. When I look at September 11th and I look back and it's like, what was September 11th? September 11th was the worst of humanity. And it was the best of humanity,
yes,
all rolled into one, right?
I think so.
And so it's like what we've tried to do from that day and subsequently, like April 29, 2007, is highlight the best of humanity. Yeah. And the best of humanity is people like you.
Well, thank you. Well, you and your entire family, your mom, I've learned a lot. I never met her, but I've learned a lot about her. I know she was the driving force.
100%.
And that, the Doylestown 9/11 Heroes Run, I guess, was the first. Was that the
first?
That was the first one. And we actually, Colleen and I actually came down here, once we got involved in the foundation for the Janet Manion function at the museum here in Doylestown. We've come to that. So the best, you saw, you're right. You're 100% right. 9/11, you saw the best and the worst of humanity. And what would possess somebody to fly airplanes into buildings and to take people hostage and to do what they did is just as worst of the worst of the worst. But then a buddy of mine, he was working at the World Financial Center that's where his job was. And he told me a story that when he had just driven into work, he had left his car at the parking garage to be parked, started to go upstairs. The first tower was hit. And he left the World Financial Center, which was across the street. And he says he was standing outside, looking up, watching everything. And he says he kept getting bumped, kept getting pushed. And he was like, who's pushing? And he said it was firemen pushing him. Get out of the way. I got to get in there. Got to get in there. And he said to me, he goes, Tim, never once did it ever cross my mind to run into that building. Yeah. And he goes, with that, he said when he saw the first body, the first person jump, he said he ran to the parking garage, jumped in his car, and drove as fast as he could to get out of New York. But he said, meanwhile, all the firemen and cops were still coming. And he said that was an example. He goes, I never thought of doing that. He goes, but guys like you were willing to do it. And that's what I think about. I think about the guys that got on those rigs, responded, they looked up, they saw what they were going to, and they still went to work. none of them flinched. None of them said, I'm not going. They said, let's go. You see on the different videos, the one chief telling his lieutenant brother, you got to go up. Okay, I'm going up. Yeah. And off they go. And to hear the different stories of, even in the days after, the different, I remember, they came out with a list of the missing, they called it. Yeah. It was the list of the missing, and it was probably almost 700 names long of missing firefighters, of names they couldn't account for. And there was a guy on the list that I had gone to the fire academy with, and he's on the list, and he's missing. And I'm like, oh my God, you're going down the list, you're like, oh my God, no way, oh my God. So I saw his name, and I'm like, so I'm at the trade center, and one of the things that happened, we would be working and digging and moving the piles, the bucket brigades. You saw all the pictures and videos of that. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, clear the site. Something's going to collapse. So all of us would clear the site. And I remember this was probably Thursday afternoon. And I actually I come off the pile and I go through the World Financial Center, through the atrium that's collapsed. And I go through that because everybody's just, we got to go. And I get to the shoreline of the Hudson River, and there was a fire engine parked, and it was sucking water out of the Hudson River because all the fire hydrants were out of service from the collapse. Yeah. So the fire department had to suck water out of the Hudson River to fight the fires. And as I go around that fire engine, there's John Cadell, and he was the guy that I'd seen on the missing. And I said, oh my God, John, it's good to see you. He goes, Tim, it's good to be seen by you. Wow. And it was just, so there was little moments like that. Yeah. Of, going to, seeing somebody who I thought was gone. Yeah.
You see him on the missing list.
You see him on the missing list. And then some of the other things that you saw, the best of humanity. I'll tell you what, the best McDonald's cheeseburger I ever had in my life was McDonald's had a tent set up. This was probably a month or so later into the operation. But as we're coming in to go to work or going out, you would pass. And so McDonald's had a tent set up, where they were served, and it was like 2:00 in the morning.
Remember that cheeseburger?
Yeah, I remember that cheeseburger. Other things that happened that I remember, another night we had worked, and they had just reopened the subway station over by City Hall, New York City Hall. And so I had worked at the Trade Center during the night, and me and a couple of the guys that had worked, we had to go back to the firehouse and now work in the firehouse for the day. So we're like, well, we'll just go grab the subway. And we went over, and we're still in our gear, and we get over to the subway, and we're taking the Uptown train, and we sit down, and we just promptly fall asleep. Yeah. And all of a sudden, do you ever get that feeling like all of a sudden you wake up and you think somebody's watching you? Yeah. And I turn and I look, and there's about 30 people just staring at us. And I look at the guys that are with me, they're covered in dust, and and there's one person taking our picture, and as we're going, one woman just goes, thank you. And so the best of humanity was on, and as we move forward, the wars that, came out of, that Travis, fought in, and, thousands and thousands of other, service members, that have gone, guys that were, reservists in the New York City Fire Department have done multiple deployments. Yeah, about that. Our VFW, the FDNY VFW post is named after a FDNY firefighter who was an Army reservist, Engeldrum, and he deployed and was killed. So we are I believe our FDNY VFW post is the only VFW post that is not associated with a town.
Yeah, it's FDNY.
It's the FDNY VFW post. So you saw the best of humanity.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got to see those moments and experience those moments, like as someone on the ground. And, you know, I think as we close out, I think, you know, my hope for the thousands of firefighters that are still here and that didn't lose their lives that day. I mean, I think that my hope is that they still feel the appreciation, like, of a grateful nation for what they rose to do that day. So, you know, I want to say to you, as we approach September 11th, you know, thank you for what you did that day. And it means a lot. And, you know, I remember where I was 24 years ago.
I believe you were in
I'm
college,
only 25, right? So I was a year old, but I still remember. But I remember where I was that day, and you know, and I think a lot about, you know, what your friend said. I got in my car and drove away, you know, and I think for our country to see bravery on display in the way that we saw it up close and personal, I think it's the reason we had so many decided to enlist and get into the fight. And I think, you know, it's kind of a tragic reminder of the beauty of the men and women who stepped up in the way they did. So I thank you for that, Tim.
Well, I really do appreciate it. And the other thing, you know, 9/11 didn't end on, you know, 9/11, unfortunately. Sure. is a lot of guys, a lot of people have gotten sick. It's why I'm retired. They found my stuff with my lungs and my throat, you know, and there's thousands of other guys there's hundreds of guys. There's actually more FDNY firefighters have died from their exposure on 9/11 than actually died on 9/11. Yeah. And that toll continues to rise. The number of guys that have, you know, different illnesses, whether it's with their lungs or cancers or a combination. And that's the big thing is you know, it's one thing to get, you know, oh, well, this guy has asthma. Okay, asthma. Well, this guy has both, you know, asthma and leukemia and, you know, reactive airway disease. And the combinations and the amount of the cluster of, and not just with New York City firefighters, there's with the cops, with the EMS, the Port Authority, and even the civilians. The civilians that were exposed that day, you know, that survived, you know, are dealing with a tremendous amount of issues. And we talk about, you know, the victim of the World Trade Center health plan. A lot of people think, oh, that's just for the cops and no, it's for everybody that was south of Canal Street that day. You know, and then worked at the site. But I am honored that you asked me to be here for this. I'm humbled. I hope I conveyed, you know, that's just my story. There's thousands of them, you know, thousands of other stories.
Well, if I can tell you anything, I can tell you that hearing the stories are important, right?
Yeah, it is.
And so your story as a collective is important for people to hear. And so just thank you for sharing it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.